No one expected an 82-year-old woman to cross into a restricted military facility. But that morning, Betty tied her worn-out walking shoes, dusted off the army jacket folded neatly in her closet for decades, and picked up a small trowel. The sky was still dark when she stepped outside her modest bungalow in rural North Carolina. Slung over her shoulder was a canvas bag. Inside, a weathered envelope, a GPS coordinate scribbled on yellow paper, and a memory too heavy to carry anymore. She whispered to herself as she locked the door. Today, I show them. It was 1976. Betty was 34 then, serving as a military nurse at Fort Darlington, a small but high-clearance base tucked away in the woods of Montana. Back then, the Cold War paranoia ran deep. Unmarked files, unofficial orders, and buried evidence were part of everyday protocol. Some soldiers disappeared without a trace. Others were declared dead by training accident. Betty, sharp, curious, and unafraid, saw something she wasn't supposed to one rainy night in March. 3 officers were found dead inside their quarters. Official cause, electrical fire. But Betty, stationed on the night shift, had witnessed the shadow of a man walking out moments before the alarm sounded. A man who wasn't on the base's personnel list. She snapped a photo with a hidden Polaroid, just before hiding it under her bunk. But when military police began unexpected sweeps, Betty panicked. She didn't destroy the photo. She buried it. Outside the southern perimeter of the base, beneath a lone oak tree, just beyond the reach of jurisdiction. And then she stayed silent. For 48 years. By the time Betty reached the ridge above Fort Darlington, the early sky was starting to shift from black to blue. The perimeter fencing hadn't changed. 2 layers of chain link topped with rusting coils of barbed wire. Betty knelt, breathing heavily, but not from fear. She knew exactly where the weak spot was. She remembered it from the drills. She pushed up the bottom panel, crawled on hands and knees, and slipped through. Her bones ached. Her palms bled from the rough grass and gravel. But she was finally back. She stood beneath the oak tree. She had come to dig up the past, literally. At exactly 6:12 a.m., motion sensors at Gate South tripped. Inside the surveillance office, Specialist Granger zoomed in on the grainy footage. "We've got a breach, Zone 7. Looks like an elderly civilian. Uniformed. Yeah. Wait, she's wearing an old field jacket. No ID badge." The feed froze on her face. Silence. "Get me Lieutenant Graves." "Now, Lieutenant Graves. That's impossible. That's Betty McCrae. She hasn't been seen in decades." Granger. "Sir, who is she?" "Lieutenant Graves. She was married to Major William Haynes. He died in 76. The whole file was sealed." Granger. "You want me to apprehend her?" Lieutenant Graves. "No. Just follow her. Let's see where she goes." Orders were dispatched. But no one drew a weapon. Everyone who recognized that name fell silent. Betty arrived at the tree. It looked smaller now. Or maybe she was just older. She knelt, pulled the trowel from her bag, and began to dig. The ground was dry, the roots stubborn. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. She whispered to herself as she worked. Right below the roots, left side. Clink. The trowel hit metal. She brushed away the soil to reveal a rusted ammunition tin. Inside, a faded photograph, a military-issued Zippo lighter, and a folded letter. The photo showed 4 people. 3 were uniformed. 1 was not. The man in the background, blurry, partially turned, wore civilian clothing and held a clipboard. But Betty knew his face. The same man she saw that night, half a century ago, disappearing into the dark. The man who gave the silent order. 2 guards escorted Betty into a secure room in the main building. Not a single person said a word on the walk there. When Colonel Emery entered, he didn't shout. He simply stood, arms crossed, staring. "Colonel Emery, we thought you were dead." "Betty, that's funny. I thought the truth was dead." "Colonel Emery, what do you want?" "Betty, for the past to breathe again, even if just for one last time." "Colonel Emery, that photo could end careers. Maybe worse." "Betty, good. Maybe it's time something ended." The photo revealed something no living base official wanted uncovered. The man in civilian clothes was never publicly acknowledged. But off the record, he was a handler for off-the-books domestic surveillance operations during the mid-70s. He reported insubordination among high-ranking officers, those suspected of leaking intel or criticizing orders. The deaths in '76 weren't an accident. They were sanctioned. Quietly. Illegally. And Betty had the only proof that ever existed. A week later, Fort Darlington hosted a private, unannounced ceremony. Media was not invited. But Betty stood at the center, flanked by new officers who had only heard rumors of the McRae file. A polished version of the photo was displayed on an easel. Below it, the names of the 3 officers who died that March night, names never etched on any wall, were finally read aloud. Their families had never received full answers. Now, at least, there was a shadow of closure. Betty didn't wait for applause. She didn't want a medal. She returned to her house, opened the window, hung the photograph on her living room wall, and for the first time in 48 years, she breathed without guilt. She whispered, "You're not forgotten anymore." The end.